All right, good evening. This is week 4 of the study of the book of Romans. If you're watching this on YouTube, this is the first of a lot of cold nights, apparently. We haven't been above freezing now in about 3 days, and it doesn't look like we're going to be above freezing until next week. So it's really, really cold right now, but we're doing the Bible study tonight. We're all inside, so we're in good shape. Tonight, tonight we will be focusing in on chapters 9, 10, and 11. And a lot of the things that we have sort of not skipped, but at least kind of made just reference to are because we're going to talk about them now. All the questions we had talked about, so what is it with Israel, the Jews, the Israelites, all these different terms that we use? What is this? What is going to happen? And 9, 10, and 11 really sort of hone in on that. They're not easy, and I want to just say this up front. We may not agree completely on this. Scholars do not agree on how to read these texts. There are some scholars that look at these texts and go, well, that clearly says this. And then you read another scholar and it clearly says that. So just know that we will run into some things where, again, we might not agree, or we might disagree with, the writer that, most of us have a study Bible. Like if you're looking down the bottom for the study stuff, you might go, I don't know if I buy that. Or you might go, wow, I never thought of it that way. All of that's valid. Okay. We're going to have good discussion. And, if we solve all of Romans issues, great. I'll write a book and I will be famous. Thank you. I would really appreciate that. It would help me a lot. My guess is we're probably still going to have some questions when this is over. But we're going to go through this as best we can tonight and take a look at these chapters. So let's just get started. So let's start with a word of prayer, and then we'll jump right in. Gracious and almighty God, tonight as we study the book of Romans, this incredible text that has shown us so much and guided us and challenged us and asked us to really think deeply about our faith. We thank you for this text, and we pray tonight that as we study, you will send us your wisdom and guidance so that not only do we read your text, but we live it, that it's so powerful, God, that we write it on our hearts and then live it with our lives. And so we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So here's the question. This will guide our entire night. So if you need to write it down, go ahead. If not, I'll just say it, and I'll probably say it again. But here's the question. Will God's means of salvation, Jesus Christ, will it or will it not save God's covenant people, Israel? And if the answer to that is no, then is that the very definition of injustice? And if it is, and if salvation does come to Jews, then how? Those two questions and that sort of understanding that leads us to tonight, very, very difficult. Again, I mentioned this just before we prayed, but scholars disagree on this vehemently. I remember I was taking my New Testament class. We had Gospels, and then we had basically the letters Paul. And I was in my Paul class, and we were studying these texts, and a bunch of us were having some conversations about, well, what, how do we deal with Judaism, and what do we do with that? And I'll never forget, I had a professor who looked at us and said, you guys haven't read Romans. He goes, go read it again. It isn't about what you're going to do with the Jews, it's about what the Jews are going to do with you. And I was like, oh. It's a fascinating 3 chapters. Because one of the things I want to say before we read a thing, and I want this to be very clear, Paul was a Jew. Yes, He had his feet in the Gentile world. Yes, he studied under Gentiles. Yes, he's become now the messenger to the Gentiles, for sure. But Paul has a unique affinity for his own people. I know that sometimes this gets lost, and I've heard different preachers and scholars kind of go at this. Paul never ceases to love his own people, okay? I think where Paul's coming from is he wants them to find what he's found in Jesus. And I think for Paul, he's like, look, I mean, think of all the references we've made so far in chapter 2, in chapter 3, in chapter 5, even the examples of Abraham and Adam. He's trying to appeal to his Jewish brothers and sisters and say, look, all the evidence is there. All the evidence is laid out there for you. Not in something new, not in, I mean, again, the New Testament doesn't exist yet. So I'm talking about your scriptures. And I think it really hurts him that many of the Jews reject Jesus. I think he wants them so badly to believe. And I think that's a really powerful place to start. And the reason I wanted to make that very clear is as you read this text, he's going to say some things that are hard, bordering on harsh. But I don't think they come from a place of hatred. I think they come from a place of of pleading with his people, with begging his people to believe, to understand, to really grasp on to the faith that comes through Jesus. You know, I use this analogy sometimes, especially when I'm teaching youth or especially youth. But you know how like you can tease your mom, or you can tease your spouse, you can tease your children, but what if somebody out on the outside does? Like, I remember back when the girls were younger and if somebody would pick on Chelsea or Brittany, I mean, my wife, Mama Bear Claus came out, right? I think of it like that. Paul is an insider speaking to his own people. See, if I was to say the things Paul said, I think it comes off a little different. You say things like that, it comes off a little different. But I think for Paul, again, who grew up a Pharisee to the Pharisees, he says, he can say some of these things as an insider that we might originally go, wow, that's really harsh. Ooh. And I think you're meant to recoil. But again, I want to make that very clear. I don't believe it's because Paul is trying to completely be, the judge or whatever of the Jewish people. I think he's saying, look, brothers, sisters, you can get this. Okay. So let's take a look at some of that. Let's start in chapter 9, and let's start in in verse 1, and let's read to verse 5. So somebody read that, please.
I speak the truth in Christ. I am not lying. My conscience confirms it through the Holy Spirit. I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart. For I could wish that I myself were cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my people, those of my own race, the people of Israel. Theirs is the adoption to sonship. Theirs the divine glory, the covenants, the receiving of the law, the temple worship, and the promises. Theirs are the patriarchs, and from them is traced the human ancestry of the Messiah, who is God over all, forever praised. Amen.
Okay. He's definitely saying something there. What's the first thing he talks about? What's the first thing he says?
Well, he tells them he's not lying because it's been confirmed by the Holy Spirit.
Yes. Very important here. what he's about to say is from the Holy Spirit. And I think it's important that he says these things because, again, he's about to get down and dirty. And I think he wants them to understand. It's not because I've given up on my people or I forget my people. In fact, it's because, and look at the things he lists: the patriarchs, the adoption, the law, the worship, the you are the line of the Messiah. It's because of those things that not only do I not give up on you, I have hope for you. I want you to get this, I want you to understand. All right, go ahead and read on a little further. Let's see, read through verse 8, read 6 through 8.
It is not as though God's word had failed, for not all who are descended from Israel are Israel, nor because they are his descendants are they all Abraham's children. On the contrary, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. In other words, it is not the children by physical descent who are God's children, but it is the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring.
Keep reading.
Well, this was how the promise was stated. At the appointed time, I will return, and Sarah will have a son. Not only that, but Rebekah's children were conceived at the same time by our father Isaac. Yet before the twins were born or had done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose in election might stand, not by works, but by him who calls, she was told, the older will serve the younger. Just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. What then shall we say? Is God unjust? Not at all, for he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. It does not therefore depend on human desire or effort, but on God's mercy. For scripture says to Pharaoh, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Therefore, God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden.
Okay. So there, literally in what, 12 verses, 13 verses, we go from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Moses to Pharaoh in 12 verses. He's definitely trying to lodge this argument in something. Quite frankly, he's trying to lodge it in the law, in the Torah. And he's lodging this argument here because, again, the people at this time, again, the Jewish folks at this time, I mean, again, we're the chosen of God and all that sort of thing. Through circumcision, we are God's chosen people. We are descendants of Abraham. And he's using all of these things that, again, well, I would agree to that if I'm a Jew, right? If I would agree to those things. But there's one particular part that would really stick in my side. That would really make me go, what is he talking about? Did you catch it? What did Paul say that really might bother them?
Oh, it was that part about, what was it? Oh, well, he says something that does not therefore depend on human desire or effort, but on God's mercy. Is he talking about that God's going to save the Gentiles also?
I think that's definitely part of it. But again, I would actually back up a little further, because in that story, if you remember the story of the Pharaoh and the Israelites, who did God show mercy to? Pharaoh or the Israelites?
Oh, the Israelites.
Okay, so in that story, God's mercy makes sense. See what I mean? So back up just a little further. What's been the argument? We are the descendants of Abraham, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, we are natural born.
He says, in other words, it is not the children by physical descent who are God's children, but it is the children of the promise.
Oh, whoa, time out. Wait a minute. Excuse me?
Yeah,
this is
children of the promise.
this is a very different thing, because up until now, physical descent, shouldn't that matter? I mean, if I can trace my line to Abraham, I am a Jew. Or I'm an Israelite, which, by the way, we'll talk about that in a moment. So if I trace my line there, then I'm part of the covenant promise. Except that Paul says, well, that might not be the case. Might be the case. I mean, let me read it to you again. This means that it's not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as descendants.
Oh, who are the children of the promise?
Exactly. Well, I think what Paul is going to say is, I've only been talking about this for 8 chapters. I think Paul's going to say, I've only for the first 8 chapters of this letter tried to explain to you that all means all here and all, blah, 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 Gentiles, Jews, all that stuff. But I think this is a sticking point, because, again, let's just talk about it from the Jewish perspective. Why do we have to let them in? I mean, if we're the covenant people, why do we open that covenant up? I mean, again, think of it from perspective. Does that dilute the covenant? Does it make it less than for those? I mean, is there different levels of covenant? Is there different levels? Because maybe the way it works is, God, we're part of the natural, so God must love us a little bit more. God must include us a little bit more. I mean, he might take in the Gentiles, and that's fine, but they're not us, right? That's a tough question. And it's right here in the forefront, because remember, we're dealing with a church here, a young church that was probably established sometime in the 40s, 30s, 40s. This is written in the early 50s. You've had the Jewish exiles, so these are probably Gentile Christians who are now receiving back some of the Jews that have returned from exile when they were exiled out of Rome. And they're coming back. They're like, well, some of the things you say make a lot of sense. I mean, I can just imagine them going to the synagogue or going to the church, to this young church, and hearing things and go, yeah, some of that sounds great, until you get to the whole Jesus is Messiah thing. And especially when you say that a Jew, is your savior. If he's anybody's savior, he's ours, and we're not convinced that that's really him. You can see where this is starting to build for Paul. Because again, look where he lodges this argument. He even comes back, and this is where I want you to pick back up on exactly what you said, Doug. Let's pick back up with that. It doesn't depend on the human will or exertion, but on God to show mercy. See, again, this goes back to the thought that, hey, if I just follow the law, because again, I'm a Jew, I have the law. If I follow the law, I will be righteous. Simple as that. But remember the first 8 chapters of this text, that it's impossible to follow the law completely. It was impossible to be made righteous by just the law. And so this is where we're running into this problem. And you can see and you can start to feel Paul's worried. He doesn't like this because his own people, the people that have always thought of themselves as the chosen, are they in or are they out? Let's keep reading. Pick up at 19.
One of you will say to me, then why does God still blame us? For who resists his will? But as who are you, O man, to talk back to God?
Exactly.
Shall what is formed say to him who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for noble purposes and some for common use? What if God, choosing to show his wrath and make his power known, bore with great patience the object of his wrath, prepared for destruction? What if he did this to make the riches of his glory known to the objects of his mercy, whom he prepared in advance for glory? Even us, whom he also called, not only from the Jews, but also from the Gentiles. As he says in Hosea, I will call them my people who are not my people, and I will call her my loved one who is not my loved one. And it will happen that in the very place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the Israelites be like the sand of the sea, only the remnant will be saved. For the Lord will carry out his sentence on earth with speed and finality. It is said, just as Isaiah said previously, unless the Lord Almighty has left us descendants, we would have become like Sodom. We would have become like Gomorrah.
Okay, stop right there. So now Paul twists the knife a little more by using the prophets.
Yeah.
Let me just see if I can describe this to you. It's not a political statement. It's just a reality. So I watched a little of the impeachment trial the last couple of days. And both sides, whether it be the House managers or Trump's defense attorneys, I find it fascinating that from the House manager's side, they've been trying to quote all these conservative writers because obviously they should support Trump. And Trump's lawyers did the same thing. Well, these are some liberal people, and they're saying what we want them to say. You see, it's always interesting when you can use someone from your side to sort of twist that knife. So if you know Hosea, and you guys might really have a good understanding of this because I know you studied it when you studied with Pastor Ben doing the prophets. But if you know about Hosea, you remember he had his wife Gomer, who was a prostitute, and they had some kids, and one of them was named Lo-Ami and Lo-Ami, not my people. This text is about really about the reclamation of the people, that even though they aren't my people, they are. This is really a passage about Israel, about being reclaimed. Paul turns this passage on its head and says, oh, by the way, the not my people, those Gentiles that you don't think are his people, that's his people. I mean, that's tough language. In the very place we said to them, you are not my people, they shall be called children of the living God. Paul says, okay, so look, I know you know this passage, and I know you know this is about God reclaiming what was his. What if that reclamation includes Gentiles? And again, if you're a first century Jew, I understand why you would recoil from this. This is very, very inciting, irritating language. This is not what you're used to. This is not what you've grown up with. And Paul is really pushing the envelope here. I want to read you one quick thing because then I want us to move forward a little bit. But I want you to hear this next line, verse 30. What then are we to say? Gentiles who did not strive for righteousness have attained it. That is, righteousness through faith. But Israel, who did strive for righteousness that is based on the law, did not succeed in following and fulfilling the law. In other words, pursuing righteousness through works doesn't work. That is a fundamental change. That is not some, hey, let's change the carpet from brown to light brown. No. This is a foundational thing for a good Jew in the first century. How do you seek righteousness? You follow the law. It means you do the sacrifices, you follow the law, you read it to the letter. And this is coming from, again, a Pharisee to the Pharisee. And he says, that won't bring you righteousness. And even to make it a little bit more plain, the Gentiles who don't strive for righteousness, who don't work for righteousness,
They got it.
they've attained it. There's a word for that, but it's not positive. I won't say that word in church. The word I'm thinking. And this Bible study has been recorded, and I don't want the bishop to hear me say that word either.
You could spell it.
I bet you could. I bet you could. Do you see why this becomes so? I mean, this is inflammatory. I mean, this is foundational stuff. Again, but this is an insider talking to insiders. Remember, this is Paul talking to his fellow Jews. He can say these things, and they come off hard, and they are difficult words. But these are the words that he chooses. All right, let's push on a little further. Let's go to 10.
Is it my turn?
Yes, pick up at pick up at 5, 10:5.
Moses writes this about the righteousness that is by the law. The person who does these things will live by them. But the righteousness that is by faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven? That is to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the deep? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart. That is the message concerning faith that we proclaim. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved.
Hey, stop there for just a
For
second.
it is
Stop for just a second, Sarah. That is an incredible promise. He just dropped down. If you confess with your lips or your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Period. That is as cut and dry as it can possibly be. If you want to know what salvation is, it is confess with your mouth and believe in your heart. Again, that doesn't sound any different to us, does it? You've heard that all your life. I mean, I guarantee you've heard a preacher give at least 1 jillion sermons on confess with your mouth and believe in your heart, right? But to the first century Jew, this is radical. Keep reading.
For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. As scripture says, Anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. For there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved.
Okay, stop right there. Again, boy, that's pretty blatant, isn't it? I mean, and it's interesting because no one who believes in Jesus will be put to shame. What's the flip side of that he doesn't say?
If you don't believe, you're shamed.
He doesn't necessarily say that, but that I could infer that a little, right? That's not sad, but boy, there's a little bit of inference, right? Even to the point that he ends up quoting again from a prophet, the prophet Joel. Now, if you come Ash Wednesday, 1 week from today, which we will not have Bible study, by the way, next week, because we have Ash Wednesday service, assuming that it's not 80 feet of snow, you will hear that verse again from Joel about the coming of the day of the Lord, and everyone who calls the name of the Lord will be saved. That's right out of Joel. It also shows up one other place. Do you remember where? Time for a little Bible trivia. That verse from Joel shows up in a very prominent place, other than just here in Romans and in Joel.
Is it a Revelation?
No?
Oh.
No. Pentecost. Do you remember when Peter gives his speech? The last line of his speech is, he says, I'm going to quote from the prophet Joel, and he ends his sermon where 3,000 were converted with the line, and everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, right out of Joel. So this passage has some history, okay? This passage has history because some of them might have remembered that this passage was preached by Peter on the day of Pentecost. This is the prophet Joel. Sometimes you'll even hear a preacher, I've even done it, make a little joke. He must have been the Holy Spirit because who preaches on Joel? But it's a powerful statement. Everyone who calls the name of the Lord will be saved. But again, when you say that, it's very easy to infer the other side of that. If everyone who calls the name of the Lord will be saved, then the negative of that is everyone who doesn't call on the name of the Lord won't be saved. Now, we're going to get to that in a second. I'm not saying that's true or not, but I know it can be inferred. This is where scholars begin to disagree. Is that what it means? Well, this is a big disagreement among scholars. Is this where we get, is this where the break really happens or not? Here's what I say to that. I don't know, first of all, but here's what I say to that. Paul definitely tells you the positive side here, right? If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart, you will not be put to shame, right? That is a guarantee. It is a guarantee, Paul says, if you call on the name of the Lord, you will be saved, right? He doesn't tell you the other side because I don't know that that's the guarantee he wants to talk about. This is where, again, I think if Paul wanted to say the other side, he would have said it. But I don't know. That's why I say here again, this is where scholars disagree. I'm not sure if Paul meant for you to say the other side of that, or if Paul just wanted you to hear, look, here's the honest truth. If you believe and confess, you'll be saved. I don't know. So there's disagreement right here a little bit with some scholars. Regardless, as I tell people, just listen. He says, the plain truth here, everyone who calls the name of the Lord will be saved. Just stick with that. And so then there's this, I want to read to you real quick, verses 19 and 20. Listen to these real quick. But I ask, have they not heard? Indeed they have. He's talking about Israel. Excuse me. For their voice has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the earth. Again, I ask, did Israel not understand? First, Moses says, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation. With a foolish nation, I will make you angry. Then Isaiah is so bold to say, I have been found by those who did not seek me. I have shown myself to those who did not ask for me. But of Israel, he says, all day long, I have held out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. I wrote in my notes, I don't know if you can see this or not, because my handwriting's terrible, and I don't know if you can actually see this. I wrote the word ouch. I don't know if you can see that. When I was taking some notes and writing, I was like, ouch, that hurts. That smarts a little, doesn't it? That's like this rubber band. How, right? That's tough language, isn't it? Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I wish there was a way to sugarcoat it, but there's not. This is a tough argument. And again, this is an insider speaking to insiders. You know, this is people that you love and trust speaking a hard word to you. Again, another analogy. This is like when you maybe you have a group of people that you really trust. Like I have an accountability group of about 4 people. And I've told you about that group. Sometimes they need me, sometimes I need them, right? It's not always fun when they have to correct me. When they go, now, Scott, you know better. I don't like that very much. It doesn't feel good. And truthfully, I don't like to do it to them either. But I love them enough to do that. They love me enough to do that. I think Paul loves his people enough to say these things. He's trying to help them because I think he wants them to see, look, it's right there in front of you. All right. Let's go to 11. Oh man.
Well,
yes.
I have a thought here.
Yeah, great. I love thoughts.
Well, is Paul trying to say that? I mean, I keep thinking the reason that God sent Jesus was because the Jewish people had basically hardened themselves, or, you know, I'm sure there were some that were trying to follow the law and worship God, but I think the reason that God sent Jesus was because they kept messing up, and they kept, and then, you know, and so, and of course they were really down on the Gentiles, or the people that weren't that weren't Jewish or weren't part of the Hebrew nation. You know, we're saved and y'all aren't, so we're up here uppity, and we don't have to worry about. And so God says, "Hey, nah, that's not going to work. I'm going to have to do something."
It's interesting. If you look and again, this is I would say this is probably widely accepted, not completely, but widely. If you look at the trajectory, I think, of the Old Testament, God creates and then has to make covenants because humanity messes up. God gives them the law because they couldn't keep it together. God sent them judges. Like right now, I'm reading the book of Judges, which is, by the way, a very strange book. But he gave them judges, right, to give them some direction. Then eventually God relented and gave them a king. Started with Saul, right? And he had the kingdom. Gave them the prophets. And I think there's a really cool line in one of our creeds. It says, and in the fullness of, it's actually the baptismal covenant. He said, in the fullness of time, God sent Jesus. God has been trying to reclaim his people. God has been in the business of salvation for a lot longer than we think. One of the things I often hear, especially as a pastor, is, well, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament, they're just so different. They can't be the same God. And I'm like, they are. And the reason I think so is God has always been the God of salvation, bringing his people home. I mean, look at the story. I don't want to give this away because I'm about to preach on Noah, and I think it's next week actually, and I'm going to talk about that because after the flood, first off, the flood happened and because of some bad stuff, and then literally like they get off the boat and bad stuff starts happening again, and you're like, boy, they didn't learn their lesson very well. You see it with Abraham. You see the covenant established even through Isaac and then Jacob. I mean, Jacob has definitely some not so good parts. Even as you go through all the kings, I mean, if it was based on righteousness, I mean, look, we all love David, but David has his problems. I mean, when you study David, I mean, you have to deal with murder and sleeping with another man's wife, adultery, and I mean, David does some, and David kills his tens of thousands, right? I mean, David has some problems, and yet David is revered, right? Solomon, greatest wisdom of all time, but we all know Solomon had his issues too. And I think what you're seeing here is all these different attempts throughout history that God was making to call his people home. And they didn't get it. When I was reading, I've been reading Judges. Judge comes in, things go good for about 20 or 30 years, and the judge dies, and they have 40 years of problems. And then another judge comes around, and they do good for 20, 30 years, then they do have, I mean, it's just a cycle, a never-ending cycle. Jesus becomes the definitive salvific movement. And again, definitely Jewish, and I don't want to miss that because it's not like that all of a sudden Jesus did things that weren't Jewish. I mean, go read Matthew. I mean, good grief, Jesus is very Jewish. I mean, his parents take him to the temple. I mean, even Luke, the Gentile, said, 8th day, Jesus' parents took him to the temple to be circumcised. He went back to all the festivals. I mean, Jesus didn't, and I think it's important that there are multiple times he says, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. The problem becomes is that they're not buying it. And I don't, and I think a legit question might be, are they not buying it because the Gentiles are coming into it, or they just don't buy it because they don't buy that Jesus is the Messiah? And I think both those might be the answer. But you're right. Jesus becomes a very, just go read the Gospels. Jesus is a polarizing figure. He pushes status quo. In fact, you look pretty closely, it doesn't matter whether you're Jew or Gentile, he can make you fairly frustrated very quickly. In one breath, he's saying he tells the story, about healing a man on the Sabbath to the Jewish authorities. And the next he's talking about, give to Caesar what's Caesar's and to God what's God's. Huh? Now in context, those make better sense. But Jesus pushes on this to the point that quite frankly, depending on which gospel you read, and I would argue both, all four, I would argue that both of these are correct. All of those people had a hand in the death of Jesus. I don't think it's fair just to blame Jesus' death on the Jews, and I do not think it's fair to blame it just on the Gentiles. In fact, again, if you want to do a little bit more, Paul's going to say we all participated in that. But that's another conversation for another time. That's probably a little more than we want to do tonight. But I think that's where I think you're right on top of that, because I think you're picking up on, how is Jesus really that important? And the answer is yeah. Yeah. And the Jews, the Jews he's referring to, and these are not Jewish Christians, these are the Jews that don't believe in Jesus, struggling with them because he wants them to. He thinks they should. And he thinks they should because it's right, it's like, look, this is right there in front of you. How can you not see this? You ever had that happen where you see something, you're like, how can you not see that? I think that's where he is. Okay. All right, I want to make sure we get through. I want to try to get a little bit further here. I'm going to read for just a second so we go on. Verse 5, chapter 11, verse 5. So too, at the present time, there is a remnant chosen by grace. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. Whew. That's a mouthful. Okay. Remnant. I want to quickly talk about remnant. You ever heard anybody talk about remnant theology? Ever run across that before? So if you look throughout Jewish history, there's always been a remnant. When the kingdom is formed, remember it separates into the northern kingdoms and the southern kingdoms after Solomon. And in 721, Tiglath-Pileser III from Assyria comes and takes off the northern kingdoms into exile. But the tribe of Judah and a little bit of Simeon survive, right? So there's a remnant. Then if you remember, the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar come and they take the southern kingdom to exile in about 586 BC. Well, when they return, there's a place when they return that it talks about that not everybody returned. Some of them intermarried, some of them didn't come back. A remnant came back. And one of the things that is very apparent is there's always a remnant. There's always something left over. Even like the Noah story, right? Destroys all of humanity, except for those 8. There's a remnant. And here he uses remnant, that remnant theology, that there's always a remnant, to say, look, this remnant is by grace. If it was by works, then grace isn't grace. Because if you can earn it, if you can earn the right to be part of the remnant, then what do you need God for? What do you need grace for? An interesting question, and it pushes this argument further. All right, verse 11. Somebody read that. Read through 24. Let's see if we can't knock this out.
Again, I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? Not at all. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. But if their transgression means riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their fullness bring? I am talking to you, Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles. I make much of my ministry in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead?
Stop right there. If the rejection, if the Jews stumble, if the Jews not following God, if the fact that the Jews turned away from God, if that's what brought reconciliation, can you imagine if they turn and repent, what that might look like? It's the greatest what if then statements. I mean, listen again. If their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance bring short of life from the dead? That's that?
Yeah.
Resurrection talk? I mean, this is a pretty powerful statement. I mean, again, here's Paul, a Jew, saying, look, if we'll do this right, think about what we could do. Right? Keep reading.
Okay. If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not boast over those branches. If you do, consider this: you do not support the root, but the root supports you.
That's good.
You will say then, branches.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
Okay.
That's good right there. The root. That's important. If we're all either grafted in or naturally on there or any part of that tree, we don't support the root. The root supports us. That's very important. See, so once again, Paul lodges this whole idea of all can be saved, everyone who calls the name of the Lord, all that stuff we've been talking about. He lodges it in the root, which is God. This is how it goes. This is how it comes about. We're running short. Let me finish this up. I'll read it because I want to highlight just a couple of things, but I want to finish this up by starting in verse 25. I know we're running short of time. So that you may not claim to be wiser than you are, brothers and sisters, I want you to understand this mystery. A hardening has come upon part of Israel until the full number of Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, out of Zion will come the deliverer. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. As regards the gospel, they are enemies of God for your sake. But as regards election, they're beloved for the sake of their ancestors. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. Just as you were once disobedient to God, but have now received mercy because of their disobedience, so they have now been disobedient in order that by mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. For God has imprisoned all in disobedience, so that he may be merciful to all. Oh, the depths of riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who has been given a gift to him to receive a gift in return? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. Well, so I go back to the very first question I asked you. Israel in or not? Paul says, all Israel be saved. But he also says that a hardening has come until the full number of Gentiles has come. What's all that about? I don't know. Much debated right here. Much debate. Because Paul seems to come back after 3 chapters of literally taking the knife and twisting it as deep and as hard as he can at his Jewish brothers and sisters. It's almost like he comes back and goes, well, now look, once we get all the Gentiles, you guys are in. Now, again, scholars disagree vehemently on this. Some scholars say, yes, all Jews are in. Some say a remnant is in. Some argue that what that really refers to is at the end of time, that they, when the Jews, again, kind of that Revelation talk that they will come back and they'll receive and accept the Messiah. And I don't know. I think any of those are plausible. People ask me all the time, what do you think about the Jews? I say, they're God's chosen people. Are they saved? They are God's chosen people. Whatever that means. Yeah, but they are, and they are our spiritual. I mean, they're our spiritual ancestors. We share a common ancestry. I don't know. I mean, again, if I read it plainly, yeah, Paul says, yeah. Who is Israel? I think that's a good question. Are they natural born, or are they children of the promise? Remember all that stuff? I think it's not as cut and dry. And I think that's why Paul goes to great depths here. Because I think Paul wants his people to know God through Jesus Christ. He wants them to believe. Again, does it mean that they're not in? They may be in. They might be. But I know, as Paul says, I know that everyone who calls the name of the Lord is in. An interesting question. Because I have to go back to the first one I asked you about the whole, if God's way of salvation is Jesus Christ, does that apply to his people? And if it doesn't, then that's injustice. Paul sort of says that. If God's people aren't God's people, then I'm not sure what that means, right? Because aren't the gifts irrevocable? But if the answer is yes, God, salvation through Jesus is how he saves the Jews. How? I don't know. I don't know. And that's why, again, this is hotly debated. Books and books and books and books are written on this. And again, that's why when people ask me, I simply say, look, I just go back to that case, what Paul says. Paul's very clear. No one who confesses with their mouth and believes in their heart will be put to shame. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. That to me is pretty cut and dry. Now, is the other side of that true or not true? Again, I'm not going to deal with that. I have my thoughts on it, but my job as a pastor is to help people say yes. My job is not to convince you that there are loopholes. My role is to help you, again, say, call on the name of the Lord. So again, I told you that we might end this in a place where you have just as many questions as you have when you started, and maybe even more than you started, because you've read through this. You're like, wait a minute, did it say that or did it say that? Exactly. But it is pretty powerful. It is an insider. It is a person who loves his people, who loves the people of his ancestry, and who wants for them the promises that he's now preaching to the Gentiles. Life and salvation through Jesus. He wants that even for his own people. Does he get it? I don't know. What's the resolution? I don't know. I don't know how some of the people ended up taking this. Obviously, we have modern day Judaism, modern day Christianity. We have our differences. And it's just as tricky now as it was then. Any thoughts? Questions? Okay. Good stuff. Tough. Good work though. It's good stuff. Tough chapters. These are tough, but really informative and lots to study, lots to think about. Now, next week we will not meet because of Ash Wednesday. So when we come back, we will look at 12 and 13. We will probably spend the majority of time in 12. Actually, Pastor Ben and I both have preached on that passage recently, but we will be going into it in depth because it's pretty amazing. So we will look at that very closely. And then the final week, 2 weeks from then, we will study the last parts of Romans. So between now and then, if you have any questions or thoughts as you're studying, or if you're thinking about something and you go, gosh, I wish I'd asked that, have that ready, because this next 2 weeks will be the time to really to go through some of that as well. Okay. All right. Excellent work. Let's close with a prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for loving us. We thank you for giving us these words. We thank you for reminding us that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Help us to call on your name today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. Good work. Thank you all. I'm going to turn the recording off.